everyone. My name is Hillary, and I'm here from Power of Work to give some interview tips. Power Work in general is a nonprofit where we try to help provide people with any sort of employment support, and that includes these kind of little webinars where we're trying to give tips and kind of educate people on clinical research, TMS, how they all integrate. And then specifically today, we're going to be looking at just some interview advice and then some sample questions that we can work through. Alrighty. Okay, so we already had a similar presentation that we did, so feel free to refer to that YouTube video. But as a refresher from last time, that just some basic overall thoughts for as you get ready for doing an interview. So a lot of times people, don't want to come off as cocky or arrogant during the interview, but it's also your time to shine. So it's not quite the moment to be humble. You do not want to take credit for everything or say you've done things that you cannot back up with like any sort of stories or evidence. So everything you say, you want to be able to provide evidence to support, but you do want to convince them to hire you. That's the goal of this. And so you want to make sure that you do talk about and highlight your accomplishments. Another good tip as you get ready for an interview is to really read the job description and fully research the company that you are applying for. A lot of times they will have different kind of corporate goals and visions and things like that that they'll list on their website. And sometimes they even use those specifically as they are kind of grading you during the interview. So if you can find that kind of information about the company, and it's usually, on their about website, and you can find out some really interesting tips on what the company is really looking for. And you can definitely try to highlight that in your interview and find reasons to bring that up. So I highly recommend that. And then as you're looking through the job description, you want to make sure that if there's any sort of buzzwords that they have put the effort into including in the job descriptions, that means it's important to them. So if they say dynamic, you try to find an example of showing your flexibility and being dynamic within your kind of interview answers. So definitely make sure that you fully research the company, read the job description, and really make sure you know what give me one moment. Okay, there we go. I think that worked. And so you just want to fully research the job that you're applying for to really understand the job description, right? Because they will be asking you during the interview to kind of understand, do you have the qualifications and the skills and the experience that says that you can do the job, right? That's the goal of the interview. And so to really like almost have the job description like memorized should be a part of kind of your interview preparation process. So what we do at Power of Work is a lot of times we will look at the job description really heavily prior to application point, right? So you should really read your resume and make sure that the job description kind of is answered within your resume. So you speak to every point. And then and that helps if there's a couple things that they say on the job description, I would highlight them. If, for example, you say, I don't have that experience, you want to highlight that so that as you prepare for your interview, you can think about certain situations and things like that you can bring up that would kind of answer if they ask you about that, right? So they could say, oh, I see that you don't have organizing meetings on your resume. You haven't done that before. So they might ask that because if that's in the job description, that's something that they want, right? But you can say something along the lines of, oh, no, I haven't, but I do feel as though I'm really comfortable with technology, and I've utilized Google, and I've definitely been able to set up meetings, and I like event planning, so you can speak to it without having the actual experience. And that's a skill, right? And it helps by planning, right? So if you can really know the job description, know what aspects of the job description you already have experience on and which ones you don't, and then basically every point you should have ready to speak to. So I definitely highly recommend spending the time to really know and understand the job description. Okay, so let's see. I think give me one moment. I'm not too sure what. All right, I deleted the wrong slide. Sorry. So this last portion here, we talked about. Oh yeah. So then give the one word. You don't want to give one word answers, right? So you want to have, and we'll talk a little bit about this in detail, but your answer should be about 1 to 2 minutes. So you don't want to talk forever, and you also don't want to give one word, something in between. So as you prepare for your interview, you should time yourself, and it should be about 1 to 2 minutes. And then that'll help as we talk about this. So this is kind of the behavioral interview questions and how you work through them. And this is how you should answer any questions, not just behavioral, right? So if they're asking specifically about your job experience, then you can talk about, you want to always provide a specific example for each question. You don't want to be where you give like hypotheticals, right? And like I said, if you don't have a relevant work-related answer, you can use personal ones, right? It's less, it's not as good, but they're really looking for your skills and your ability to show that you have these skills. And so if, like I said, with the meeting planning, if you haven't done that professionally, but you can talk about planning an event for your church or something, then you can do that. It's, again, not as good, but you definitely want to have, you don't want to say, if they ask you, do you have experience setting up and planning meetings, you don't want to just say, no, I don't, right? Because then they're just gonna say, okay, no, she doesn't have that. So you can say something along the lines of, while I haven't done it professionally, I have done it extensively in my personal life. I planned a 300-person party for my church, and you can give details, right? So the aspect is you want to use STAR or SOAR, and it's situation, task, action, result. So you want to give a background on what the situation was and kind of what was the task that then you specifically had, what was your action, and then what was the result. And you want to talk about the result not just for yourself, but kind of the result for everyone. So as I'm getting ready right now to do some interviews for clinical research, I'm very much focused on preparing right now different situations that I've been in and how they could potentially answer certain questions, right? So I've gone through and thought about, and I'll just even pull them up, some situations that I've done, or like, experiences I've had, or things that I've accomplished, and I've mapped out multiple different like stories, scenarios that I can speak to really easily. And then that way, if somebody asks me about multiple different questions, I have a whole bunch of different things ready, right? And I can apply them to a lot of different things. So what I'm trying to say is that you don't have to say, okay, this is my one example for conflict with an employee. This is my one example for this thing. Think about your examples and think about all the different possible situations it can result. So, for example, last night when we went over just interview questions, there was one about like, having a conflict with somebody at work. But I use that, I have a specific scenario that I talk about, and I talk about how, I won her over and what I did to do that. So that's the A, the action, and then the result. But the result for me, the result for her, and the result of like what the overall, how it helped the company. And then since I'm in clinical research, I always want to tie things back to the patient. So by my action has a result that then saves the company money, but that also translates into more resources being available for patients, right? So to be able to have more patients in the study or to provide more care to the patients, right? So the overall goal is to produce medicines that then help patients, right? And so you kind of always want to tie things back to that if you're doing kind of a clinical research interview. And so that's something to think about. You always want to think about what situations you have, and then kind of break it down into this STAR method, or O is the outlook, which is kind of instead of the task. And that kind of helps to frame what your like what the situation was, but in a sense of like a different aspect in terms of maybe what somebody was viewing, right? So if you're talking about a conflict situation, this is good to utilize like an outlook instead of being like, oh, well, it was a task, because it's not really a task. It was like, okay, her outlook, like she may have been unhappy about this, and I was coming from a point of view of this, and then what I did to resolve this, and then, you know, did it get resolved? And so it's really important to think about all these different situations you can use and kind of break it down, because sometimes what people do is they might be asked, okay, tell me about a time you had conflict with an employee, and they might just say the situation. The question is, when did you have conflict? Your answer could be, oh, I did have conflict when this one person shoved me, right? But that's not the answer to the question. They really want to know what action you took and the results that happened, right? So you want to be careful when you answer these questions that you're really answering the whole question, not just like the situation. So that's why the STAR message kind of developed. And I know that in the interview that I will be having, they very much specifically will even in the interview say, can you please break it down according to the STAR method? Because they just want to be very clear that they want the whole picture. And I had a friend who recently went through the process, and she said that she got feedback saying that she didn't give enough background. So like she didn't really give like the situation, she just kind of jumped into the action and the result, and she should have given more background on the situation. And then, yeah, so then just have I think it's highly recommended to really prepare for interviews, right? I think there's no harm in going above and beyond and really being ready. And so if any of you are getting ready for interviews and you want help with that, I'm happy to help, because I think that it's a step that people do skip, or they just put a little bit of time into. So what I like to do is I like to look at all the questions and think about what questions I'll be being asked, and then actually answer them. So you can have a Google Doc and you answer up. And then, as I mentioned, having multiple different solid scenarios and stories so that you are actually answering the question and that you're ready, right? Because in that interview, a lot of times you don't have that time to really think. You don't want to be thinking through all your different scenarios. You want to have really thought about all of the different scenarios and stories and experiences that you've been through that could answer these typical questions they have. And then yeah, as we talked about, you definitely did not want to talk about like a hypothetical. You want to give the specific situation, and then, you know, how you evaluated it. You know, did you see it as an opportunity? What was your action? And so yeah, so that's it's worth it to really sit down and think about all the different ways you can go over these questions. Okay, and then just some other tips are, you know, that hiring managers will try to think of some tricky questions, because part of it is to really understand who you are and what skills you have. And so one of that is, did you prepare for this interview? Like, do you seem ready? And then another thing is, how do you handle things that are unknown, right? So if they ask you a tricky question, it's not always that they're specifically looking for do you know the answer to the tricky question, but it can also be, do you know how to be caught off guard, and how do you handle yourself? Are you able to perform under pressure, which is an important life skill, and it does help, and it's a good skill to have as an employee. And then, as we mentioned earlier, making sure that you benefit the company, or in my case, also talk about how my work benefits the patients, right? Which is something that you do have to take an extra step, because I don't work very much directly with the patients, but the work I do does impact the patient. So for example, if you're getting ready for like a TMF interview, you can talk a lot about how processing documents and catching errors and helps have, you know, a clean TMF, which results in drugs being approved and drugs being able to get to patients that need them, right? And or you can talk about how by doing a completeness review and catching different documents that are missing, that really helps the clinical operations team know what documents they should request from the CRA when they're out on site. And so therefore you're helping the overall process and you're streamlining resources, because if you're catching it versus the monitor trying to catch it at before the closeout visit, that helps their time and it just provides more resources for the study to be successful and to be able to bring this medicine to the market that patients need. Okay, so then we have some sample questions, but basically I'll just go over a couple of these and maybe give my thoughts on how you should answer them. But as we talked about, I think one of the most common behavioral questions you'll get asked is some sort of conflict challenge question. So this example is, can you tell me about a time you had an issue at work when it was not anyone particular responsibility to solve it? So in this case, they are looking for you to show the ability to be dynamic and flexible. And I think the word that we used previously was kind of like functionless, right? So it's not really your job. And a lot of times there are issues that come up and it's not anyone's particular job to solve it. And so that means that somebody has to step up and handle it. And this can be really small. Like, I mean, it could even be, it's no one's job to really answer the phone, but you notice that you were doing your job and the phone was ringing. And so you went over and you answered it. So you are showing initiative by recognizing a need and going and handling it. And so you want to talk about that, something similar. And so what I'm trying to say is that it can be really simple, even if you don't have a lot of experience in work. You can definitely find good, solid examples of times that you have done all these kind of like behavioral questions, right? This can also be another common example of this question is, you know, tell me about a time you had work with somebody who had an issue or was angry. And so that's something that you want to be ready with. You want to have a solid example. And I would say it's less important that your example is extremely accurate in the sense of, you know, maybe it was your fault. You don't really have to highlight that in the interview. You want to do is just kind of give a summary of the situation, maybe how the person felt, how you handled it. And you definitely want to find examples that, like I mentioned, help you shine, right? So you want to have examples that you don't want to pull up something that gives a bad view of you, right? And then another thing that you want to do is the where do you see yourself in 5 years? And so that's something for you to think about, to take the time, because if they do ask you that, you need to be ready and take the time to think about what are your career goals. You don't want to answer with oh, I don't know, or I'm not too sure yet. You can kind of start it that way, but you want to definitely have something to talk about, right? And that's kind of the goal of as you prepare for interviews, is to always be ready to answer these questions and to have something to talk about. I've definitely had it where I asked somebody, have you ever had conflict with a coworker? And her answer was no. And that was it. Like, you don't want to give one-word answers. It was very like, it's awkward, you know, it's like I feel like everyone, and you know, you're almost blind if you think you haven't ever had any sort of conflict with coworkers. Your answer could be, I you know, I feel as though I'm a very positive person and I try to be very aware of people's feelings, and therefore I find that I do tend not to end up in sort of dramatic situations. I don't pull myself to the drama. And as a result, I usually avoid conflict with my colleagues, but I did have one time, right? And so you can preface it that way, but then you do want to have a solid example and something that makes you look good and shows how you solved it, right? And so there's a couple other ones here. The name 3 strengths and weaknesses of yours. Think of solid strengths. And for the weaknesses, think of things that aren't all that bad, right? So you can think about things that you want to get better at, because this is an opportunity to, like, you can't say, I have no weaknesses. Again, it comes off not good. And then as we talked about, like, that weakness thing is they're looking for a little humility in that question. Everything else, you should be really talking about yourself and making it positive and always sticking to the positive. In this one, you are going to talk about a little bit of negatives. So you want to address something. So this is an important question. And I do think definitely at least have one. I have seen it where people talk about 3, and that it can be difficult to come up with 3. I did have a friend who was asked this question, but with 5, and she was like, wow, she had to really think, and like, you don't want to be caught in the interview having to really think and dig around in your mind for the answer. So definitely have that one ready. Some example of a weakness that you could do. You could lead something into something that you want to do more of. So you could say, while I am developing my presentation skills, I do still think it is something that I would consider a weakness, because I am not where I'd want to be, right? So that, again, like, you can make it so that, like, I'm not horrible at X, Y, and Z, but you can say, I'm not where I want to be with my presentation skills. So I would love the opportunity to be able to eventually present in some meetings. And I would love any sort of coaching and feedback on how to successfully present in team meetings. So I can take this as, something that I'd like to improve. So that's a good way to answer the weakness question. But yeah, go through all of these questions. I want you to really look through everything and think about what kind of questions you'll be asked for your interview. But a lot of times these are common behavioral questions, and there's a couple more. And then you can also check out our YouTube channel, which we have a couple. We had a mock interview for me last night and Alicia, and we had a previous mock interview for Alicia. And then I have another interview tips that we had done before. And that one has it where I ask the questions and give you the time to answer. So I'd recommend going through these and checking them out. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, please let me know if you have questions, or we love to help and support people. So if you have any issues or you're preparing for an interview, let me know, and we can definitely work one-on-one, and or I can help you try to tailor some questions that you should be ready for. But we do have kind of template blank Google Docs of just all these questions. And I recommend taking the time, you make yourself a copy, and then you just sit down and fill it out with what situations and stories you would tell for every single one. And that also helps you think about, okay, I can use this one story for this situation and that. And that way you can think, okay, the stories that have the biggest overlap, those are going to be your go-to stories, right? And so, yeah, please let me know if you have any questions, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.